It wouldn't be Norwich City if there wasn't some adversity, especially in pre-season. Welcome back to the latest edition of the PinkUn podcast. It's going to be an interesting one this week. We've got plenty to discuss. Two friendlies, of course, an injury to a new signing and an imminent departure of a goalkeeping coach, plus much more on top of that. I'm your host, Connor Southwell, joined by Paddy, Davitt. This podcast, as always, comes to you in association with Future Radio and our sponsors, Cavill Healthcare, as well. Pad, an interesting weekend for Norwich City. Where should we start? Let's start with Borja Sainz. I think that seems like the most appropriate place to start. Kind of reached us, didn't it, before the game at King's Lynn that there was an injury concern. I think obviously him not being there was a key part of that. We'd heard from David Wagner after Tuesday's draw at Barnet that he would be involved. So it was a little bit of a surprise that he wasn't. Then I think by the time the team news did come out, maybe just afterwards, it became apparent to us that this was an injury concern. It was then a case of how bad that injury was. And as David Wagner confirmed post-match, pretty bad is the answer. Out until October. Is this a curse at this point? I mean, what are we putting this down to? Because it's incredibly unlucky for a player who hasn't really got a track record of any injuries at all, certainly no long-term ones. He turns up at Norwich City. He has, 4 days of training, and then he ends up with an ankle ligament injury that keeps him out for a few months. Devastating blow for Norwich City.
It certainly is. And 12 months on from the last time he was at King's Lynn for a Norwich friendly, and the news was confirmed after that game that Isaac Hayden, then their first Dean Smith signing actually from Newcastle, loanee, key figure, was recruited to do a very specific job in the middle of the base of that midfield. And, you know, a player who'd arrived with an injury hit campaign at Newcastle, who were trained, I think, fully for the first week of pre-season, to draw a parallel with Borja Sainz, not quite to the same extent, but no issues at all from that previous injury. And then the start of what turned out to be a pretty forgettable loan experience for all parties concerned, punctuated by injury. Was never really up to speed and contributed, unfortunately, to maybe Dean Smith's demise as well, because it was clear that he'd identified Isaac Hayden, made him his first signing of that summer, that he was a key figure. And that's another parallel. I think Borja Sainz was viewed as a very key figure, is still, because it's worth clarifying that there are parallels with Hayden, but there's also a lot of similar differences. And the main one is that he doesn't have a history of injuries, serious injury. He is 22. So he should recover and rehab in pretty decent nick. And it is David Wagner put 8 to 10 weeks on it, which would take you into October. My concern then, of course, is that's all well and good in terms of the recovery from the ankle ligament damage. But the problem is the here and now was going to be his pre-season and that base fitness. And David Wagner, as he has done continuously since we spoke to him post-Barnet, massively important, this part of his season, the base fitness, the double, the triple sessions. And Borja Sainz isn't going to have that opportunity to do that now. And that isn't great at all, because, yes, he might be available from October onwards, but when is he actually going to be firmly up to speed? That's not even overlaying. First time in England, adapting to a new league, new culture, new teammates. So really, you pull all the strands together. It's an horrendous blow for the lad. As David Wagner said, he was pretty distressed, and we had other people close to it who said that was very much the vibe on Friday, that he's arrived with all that excitement that a lot of Norwich fans feel about his signing and the type of player he is, the type of player he could be, the impact he could have on this group and Norwich's season. And that's all had to be part now, through no fault of anybody, really. But when you say curse, it's hard to escape that there's some other higher power who's meddling in Norwich's affairs, really, because it does feel like a catalogue of injuries. And I'm not wishing to cast any aspersions or anything, but my mind goes back to Stuart Webber talking about there's areas that they can control as a club, as across the football departments. And this is at the end of last season, and how they can be better. And we've heard from him and others that, the sports science side, the fitness side, keeping players healthy, keeping players well, keeping players physically robust to deal with the demands, particularly of the Championship, the relentless nature of the fixture schedule, the travel that goes with it as well. They are areas that maybe those marginal games that don't come down to how deep your pockets are, that you maybe can, with the right people and the right processes, get an advantage or two over rivals. Well, unfortunately, it's now going to be back. The ball's going to be with Borja Sainz, at least, firmly in the court of Norwich Sports Science and medical staff, and getting him back. And of course, my mind's thinking about last summer. It wasn't just Isaac Hayden; it was Gabby Zara, and this is a kind of where the discourse is that these new signings that come with quite an exciting, optimistic feel around them, and it just feels like with Hayden, like with Zara, like with now Sainz, that you're basically going to have to just temper your enthusiasm and your optimism, and just hope that when his season gets going again, that Norwich have made a reasonable start and he can come and supplement that. But in the here and now, it opens up a whole different debate about, do they go back into the market and how heavy they go back into the market? Because I think the understanding was, prior to what happened on Friday at Colney with Sainz, they were looking to add another wide player and possibly move one or two of that battery of other wide players currently on the books out of the door this summer. Those plans, best laid, are up in the air now, because I think they'll definitely have to do the one and maybe two additions. And does it mean potentially players who are currently in the stable, who might have been going out the door on loan or maybe even permanence, will they now have to stay in the building? It's really a level of disruption and unforeseen events that I'm sure Wagner and Webber and the recruitment team really didn't need to have to deal with. But such is life, such is the life of dealing with footballers who can physically, stumble and break down and pick up injuries. That's part and parcel of it. David said as much after the game at Lynn to us on Saturday. It is what it is. You have to deal with it. But there's no doubt that, as he said it best, that he was over the moon with the first 2 weeks of pre-season, and the only blemish or the only blot is Sainz's injury. And, and it is quite a shadow it's cast, because I think there's no doubt of those 5 or 6 wide options right here, right now in the building, who are going to be part of it, or at least available. I'm not including Rashica in that, because we all expect him to move on. But of the others, I think if you'd have lined up 10 Norwich fans and said, right, who are your 2 wide players for Hull City on the opening day of the Championship season, I'd say 9 or 10 of those 10 say Borja Sainz, because it looked like he was going to be a very key figure from the outset. That isn't going to be the case. And so David and Stuart have to really think long and hard now about what direction they go in to try and offset what is, any way you cut it, a pretty devastating blow for all concerned.
Yeah, it is, and it goes to show, actually, you can do all kinds of recruitment. You can look into a player's injury history, you can look at data, you can speak to people, you can do all of this, and it can get to 4th or 5th training session that they're involved in on the 4th or 5th day that they're actually in the building, and there's a tackle and a funny landing, and suddenly they're out for a few months. And certainly from what we heard initially, it didn't look like that when they kind of assessed it in the flesh. It didn't look like he was going to be out for that prolonged period of time. It was only a subsequent scan that showed that up. And also, I've seen maybe some people willing to collate the kind of workload that David Wagner is putting his players through at the moment. Those triple sessions that we've heard about, double sessions as well, the 7:30 a.m. to p.m. days, and maybe thinking that there's a correlation between those. But this happened as a result of a tackle, didn't it? And as we say, a funny landing. And I think actually, if you go and watch the club put out a sort of 5-minute video or so of training before King's Lynn, and there's one shot actually as they're doing almost like this transitional drill, basically working on attacking and defending transitions. You can actually see him as the camera pans sort of sat just to the left of one of the goalposts with a physio in and around his ankle area. So I'm guessing that is his right ankle. It is. That kind of moment is captured in in video form. And yeah, like you say, it's a major blow, and it probably raises more questions than answers, certainly for those at the moment. And pre-season, it's interesting because it feels like we use the word opportunity quite a lot, and a couple of those players specifically that I wanted to speak about, someone like Przemysław Poeta, who I think everyone probably would have presumed was one of those names that you mentioned on the list for potential departures this summer. Christos Solis, maybe another one. They now have opportunities to really push themselves and say, actually, hang on, no, you don't need to go into the market and get maybe an extra one on top of the one you were getting, because we feel I can fill that hole. Likewise, maybe someone like Tony Springett, who scored at the weekend, although I still think he looks very raw for where he is at the moment. So I guess it's kind of one door closed, another one opens for those ones, isn't it? And how do Norwich now move forward with this? Because as you say, and I'm purely maybe mean this in terms of feeling, because there was slowly, cautiously, I don't necessarily want to say optimism, I'm not sure I'd attach that to it, but there was maybe a freshness arriving in terms of that feeling, given the way that last season ended. Borja Sainz was partly responsible for that, fueled that to some extent. It's an exciting signing. People look at his age, his track record, the clubs that he's been at, the pedigree in terms of his minutes in La Liga, playing for a relegated side in Turkey, but those individual numbers being pretty good. I think scoring 9 of their 42 goals or whatever it was. It's a blow in that regard as well, isn't it? In terms of bringing people with them. And again, it's not something that you can throw at their door, but it exists. It kind of, I don't know, it feels like someone's stuck a needle into the balloon, I guess, that maybe was inflating slowly.
Well, yeah, very slowly, I reckon, for me. But, because I do package this as what have we had? We've had Barnet and Kings Lynn, two fairly, no disrespect, but fairly modest non-league opposition and very much wrapped around, we've talked about it already on this podcast, double, triple sessions. And you could see large parts of these two first friendlies that, the heavy-leggedness of the players and passages of play that just sort of meandered, which is what I put to David at Kings Lynn on Saturday, that now as they prepare to fly out on Tuesday for two really, in terms of level of opponent, considerable steps up. Darmstadt, newly promoted, Christoph Zimmermann's club into the Bundesliga, Kaiserslautern, a big name in Germany. I think we'll start to tilt more towards the football side. Now, if we were recording this podcast this time next week and we've been out to Germany and back, and those next two games we've seen on the footballing side, for me, things really starting to emerge now, and combinations between certain individuals and the style of play in and out of possession, maybe extending some of the trends we saw in the better parts of the Barnet and Kings Lynn game. Then for me, then you start to think, okay, right, we might be onto something here in terms of when the real business kicks in and being competitive against, hardened championship opponents. But still too early for me in this part of the pre-season cycle. But to go back to Sainz, Sainz, and we said it, I think we might have said it on the pre-match show at the Walks on Saturday, that Sainz, if you look at the 4 senior signings that Norwich have done so far this summer, the first 3 felt that it was the addressing the mentality issues, Duffy, Barnes, Stacey as well, I guess you throw into that bracket. Players who've been there, know how to handle adversity, all elements that David clearly felt were lacking in this group, or certainly in terms of the quantity that he needed. So there, your first wave is, right, let's try and address that, get the right characters in. Sainz felt like the first part of the next phase of what Norwich are trying to do recruitment-wise, and he felt more of a player who will tell us a bit more about the type of style of football David really wants to bed in, and the options he wants in that final third particularly, that are going to bring to life what he views his Norwich looks like. I think we saw glimpses of that over the piece when he came in the door, particularly in those early weeks in January onwards. But as we all know, what was it, 1 win in the last 11, just a sad, slow trudge into mid-table nothingness last season, and far too many questions by the end of the campaign than answers, really, which wasn't the case, certainly pre-Millwall away, that win, which marked the watershed, sadly in the wrong direction for all concerned. So Sainz was, okay. I always look back at Wagner and what he did at Huddersfield and how he went about the task of getting out of the Championship and then keeping them in the Premier League in that first season, particularly on the ball and in possession, and really fast, mobile, direct, good in transition, good counter-attacking type players. And Sainz, clearly from afar, looking at the type of player he is, the numbers he produced in Turkey last year, he felt like he fitted that template. So that, for me, is where the disappointment is, that a player who you felt could add an extra dimension to what David's trying to bring to this group of Norwich players is sadly not going to be available for the first 3 months, and that it feels now they need to, again, step back into that market and look for similar types of player for me, because I'm not sure necessarily. You talked about Springett, Rowe. Rowe's been good, but again, 2 non-league opponents. I don't think you hang your hat on either of those two. Poeta, yeah, okay, I accept that he looks like he's a player you could have in and around the squad, but not for me in the 11, not at this stage of pre-season. I'd need to see a lot more from him, given, the lack of impact he's had in his Norwich career to date. Arnell, yeah, I think you can rely on him to an extent. Jolis, no, I think it's quite telling, even though it was Kings Lynn, that, of the raft of changes, he's not coming on until, the hour mark, when all the other wide players had already come on. I thought that was a fairly telling signal as well. So I look at the current stable of wide players. Now you're taking Sainz out of the equation, and it would concern me if that was the group he had to choose from the start of the season now. So I think they do need to be proactive. They need to go back into the market. And if they can, whether it's the loan options or whether it's some more astute scouring of maybe European leagues, they try and find players in that similar bracket to a Sainz. Because if they don't, I think it's such a crucial area of a David Wagner team, the full throttle football, to use the label he attaches to his style of football, that they don't have those options, I don't feel, in the building at the minute. Now Sainz is unavailable. And if they don't, it's hard to see how he can really get to a comfortable position in terms of what he wants from his team moving forward for the rest of the season. So, yeah, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that between now and Hull, we need to probably see a little bit of inward business in that area of the pitch now.
Yeah, definitely, and I think there's a telling point there from what you said, really, and now you take Sainz out of the equation. That group of wingers, really, apart from Poeta, who was obviously injured, Tony Springett, who was out on loan, that is kind of the group that Norwich had last season, really, minus Kieran Dowell, who was the one who had a real impact when David Wagner came in. Hernandez did as well, of course, and we spoke about that at the time. But you're probably putting you're putting a real hat, aren't you, on Hernandez to go and perform, and that's a lot to put on him, I think. And the one thing about Sainz, and again, we discussed this last week, is he was maybe the first player that was recruited this summer that felt really specific to David Wagner in terms of his style of play. A lot, the ones previous maybe were to do with intangibles and experience and know-how, and Jack Stacey, obviously, who I think we've both been impressed by, but like you say, against modest opposition in pre-season, kind of felt geared more to insulating the squad from an experience perspective and a know-how perspective. And Stacey obviously targeted for when Max Aarons departs, and I would put a when on that rather than if. So again, it's frustrating, I guess, for Wagner as well, because you've got a player, someone who they've worked really hard to sign. They've sort of jumped through hoops, haven't they, with the fact that there was a contractual clause that, if activated, meant they could sign him for free. So they did a lot of groundwork into this. Someone they've been watching for a period of time, now not available for a real large portion of the start of the season, when, as we know already, because we've discussed it and others have discussed it with us, that start of the season is so crucial, and you're going to be missing a piece of the jigsaw that felt so crucial to what he wants to do and how he wants to play. And let's not forget, there's pressure on him as well moving into the start of the season, right, because of the way that last year ended. So it just feels again like the odds have slipped back against them, if they ever have been for them. And like you say, it's going to require some work to rebalance that. And that area of the pitch where they have plenty of options. I mean, we've listed them: Scholes, Hernandez, Rowe, Springett, Poeta, Scholes. I think, did I put Scholes in there? Maybe I did twice. But they've got, 6 options already, excluding Sainz. They're also going to have to trim as well as add. Rashica, we've already discussed. I don't think he's due back to Norwich until after the Germany camp. But if, of course, he gets there, I don't think many of us are expecting that to be the case. And if he is there, he's not going to be here for the start of the season. So it's a really interesting area of the pitch, because, as you put to David after the game as well, a lot of his style is based around those and what they do. We saw that on Saturday. There was some really clever wing rotations, and it took a little period of time for Norwich to work out exactly what Kings Lynn were doing in terms of their defensive shape and their structure. But actually, it was probably the wide areas that held the key to them having a lot of their success. So it's a really influential area of the pitch that they need to get right, I guess, is what I'm saying. And at the moment, they're no further forward than they were at the end of last season, which, as we were still early July, so plenty of time for them to address it, of course. But I think we're looking at that with probably an element of concern if it was to persist deeper into July, aren't we?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, that's you've pretty much encapsulated it in that one sentence. They're no further forward now, through no fault of their own, really. They thought they were, and I'm pretty sure they think privately, as many do publicly, that they might have pulled a smart one, getting Sainz in the building, particularly on a free transfer, as you say. He it's all hypothetical now, but imagine he hits the ground running and it took off from August onwards. That would have looked like an unbelievable piece of business. Still may do in time, but sadly there will be a delay to that. But they're back where they started, and I was just thinking as you were talking there, I think they will probably need to do 2 now because, okay, I take David at his word after the game, and that he's drilled home this message, particularly to his wide players. Hey, look, nothing's decided. You put pressure on me. I think to paraphrase his words were, I don't want to be putting pressure on you as wide players. Weigh in with goals, weigh in with assists, and make yourself part of my plans or part of my frontline plans, shall we say. So, we'll take him at his word, and that there is still opportunities for this current group of players already in the building. But, it feels like it probably will need 1, certainly 2. And of course, that doesn't necessarily need to be 2 permanent signings, does it? I mean, we saw, and it didn't really work out, unfortunately, but Marquinhos, David's first foray as Norwich manager into the transfer market back in January was to bring in a very highly regarded Brazilian from Arsenal, no less. And it didn't work, much as it hasn't worked for previous Norwich iterations with Marcus Edwards or Patrick Roberts. You could go on. Andre Duda, for example. But I just think if you're looking at it, this is purely hypothetically, but you're looking at it, your Webber, your Wagner, you think, well, okay, we were looking to bring maybe a wide player in. Do we now aggressively go down the route of bringing one in as a permanent? And then as we get towards the start of the season, certainly higher level Premier League clubs will be making their minds up on some of their younger players. And then you maybe go down and add in, whether it was a 6-month loan, which would bridge the Sainz being back in the building, or a 12-month. And you bring in a very highly regarded, albeit maybe still to be proven, younger wide player from a Premier League club. I mean, the reason I'm sort of thinking along those lines, and I've just seen it, and again, it's hypothetical, but I've seen some reports this morning that Manchester United's youngster Ahmed Diallo, who had an excellent season at Sunderland, apparently that United feel he's not quite ready for their first team yet. He will be allowed to go out on loan again. I looked at his numbers. He had 16 goalless contributions in 37 appearances for Sunderland. Got them into the playoffs, didn't he? Or they just fell just short, didn't they? But there's a player. Now, if you're Man United, it might be, well, we think he's a bit better than mid-table championship. We may be now looking to get him a lower level team in the Premier League for a loan. So who knows? But I'm just thinking hypothetically, if that type of player was available for a loan, 6 or 12 months, if you're Norwich, you've got to have that type of option on your radar because for me, an Ahmed Diallo would be an upgrade on anything they've currently got in the building. So, it didn't work with Marquinhos, hasn't worked in the past with certain other short-term Premier League grade loans, but that isn't necessarily to say, particularly now with the cards, the way they've been dealt, that they don't go back down that route. And David, I remember distinctly saying at the end of last season, more than open to exploring the loan route again, even if it didn't actually work with Marquinhos, whatever it takes, I think he said to that question, in terms of loaning, buying, free agents, whatever, young players from the academy, whatever it takes to bring success to Norwich. So, as we sit here, if they do need to bring 2 in, it wouldn't surprise me at all if you go loan route for one and a permanent for the other. And as I say, if there's a player like Diallo, for example, that's purely hypothetically, there's no sense that he's one on their radar. But I'm seeing reports this morning that United will willingly loan him out again. If you're Norwich, you've got to be thinking that type of player is where you need to be at because, unlike Marquinhos, there's a player who's done it in the Championship and produced some substantially impressive figures as well in terms of goal contribution. So, but I'm sure Sunderland and a host of other Championship clubs would be thinking along the same lines. And that, of course, is why, to bring it full circle, it was such a clever bit of business that I'm sure Sainz would have had plenty of suitors, but it felt like Norwich got under the radar, got in there quickly, did the hard sell on him, and it paid off. And they're going to have to do that, I think, again, and be just as creative to try and solve this issue now that presents itself in wide areas.
Yes, and I think we'd probably still expect Poeta, certainly, Scholes, certainly, Springett probably as well, likely all to leave the club on loan this window. Obviously, all a bit up in the air at the moment, but that I still feels like the most reasonable expectation. Probably wouldn't surprise you if one of those stuck around, really, given the situation that they're in. If they couldn't get the 2 in that maybe we're discussing, or if they financially maybe have limitations that would only allow them to do 1. So yeah, that's a fluid situation. I guess it makes pre-season, particularly in those areas, all the more tasty. The other sort of bit of news, I guess, around the Kings Lynn game before we come on to speak about that, and again, really hard to speak to in any kind of depth. I've done a little bit of analysis on the video verdict, which you can watch on YouTube. We're not going to delve into it in too much detail because for large parts, particularly the first half, it was pretty uncompetitive. I think that's fair to say, but we will touch upon some elements in it in a little while. The second point is obviously Ed Wootten, who is departing Norwich City, set to join Leeds United. Daniel Farke, of course, has been appointed as their new manager late last week, wasn't it? Wootten is going to be joining up with him. We got wind of this sort of prior to the game at Kings Lynn. Then I think David confirmed it afterwards. It became pretty apparent anyway from the nature of Wooten's involvement at Kings Lynn and maybe the sign-offs that were happening on the pitch and various photographs and stuff. It was easy to piece together. What do you make of this, Paddy? Someone who's been at the club since 2015, started in an academy capacity. Sorry if I get my teeth in. Before being promoted to the first team when Daniel Farke was appointed. Obviously, a really influential figure in those two title wins. Played a key role in Angus Gunn and I guess Tim Krul as well, given where he was before he signed for Norwich City in terms of his career. Plenty of young goalkeepers that he's worked with as well. I'm not listing Michael McGovern as a young goalkeeper. There was a bit of punctuation in there. Young goalkeepers and Michael McGovern throughout his time. It's interesting because when Daniel Farke left, it was kind of pitched that he was very much a Norwich City employee, not part of Daniel Farke's kind of I guess trio of backroom team that he latterly took to Gladbach and obviously in his brief spell at Russia and subsequently joined him at Leeds. So what do you make of Ed Wooten's pending departure first and foremost, and then we'll go on to maybe his replacement in a second?
I don't know. I mean, it could go one of two ways, isn't it? I mean, it's hard without being on the inside of this. So, as you say, it's been quite a long time. Clearly had a good rapport with from the senior keepers. Everything you hear and read, Gunn and Krul, right down to quite a growing stable of younger type keepers now, and he was the figurehead for that. So. I guess that there will be a feeling that he's got big boots to fill, but maybe I'm more the other side, and he has been there quite a while, and this maybe does allow a refresh and a different voice. It's the same with coaches and players who become a little bit, not go through emotions, far from it, but can you become a little bit comfortable? And much as they talk about coaches when you've been working with them for a period of time, it's the same voice, they're saying the same things. It's very hard to keep that freshness almost. A new man will come in. We're pretty sure who it's going to be, and there'll be new ideas and new ways of working, and that might spark something in the current group of keepers. Whether you're Krul and Gunn at their end of the spectrum, or Vincente Reyes who's come in now. To have a different pair of eyes, a different perspective. I'm sure there's fundamentals when it comes to goalkeeping coaching that spans whoever the individual is, but. Much like you get a range of different styles of football in terms of how you want to play outfield players and the way that is coached, I'm sure there's, keepers who have specialisms that maybe not quite the mix of skills that Ed Wootten would have had, and that might add something. I'm not just obviously, feeling that that's probably, it's not the major blow that it would feel if it was, I don't know, your head coach walking out, shall we say, at this stage of the pre-season or dare one say a sporting director or whatever, but we're not on the inside. I can't say I can talk with any authority about how important a goalkeeping coach is, and any negative connotations that might come from him moving on. But as I say, it feels a little bit for me like, of course, any coach in any footballing setup has a role and importance, but. I think from what we're led to believe that the gentleman who's coming in is well known to Wagner and would have had a good rapport with him anyway. Plus, obviously, the likes of Pelach, who he's got from Huddersfield, and Andy Hughes before that, and of course Christoph Buehler, who came with him. Even John Iger, Webber, and Steve Weaver. The incoming replacement for Wootten, he won't need any introductions, I don't think, to the staff he's going to be working with. So I think it'll be a fairly seamless transition. And I kind of maybe just come at it from a positive perspective, and that it might energise again, the Krul, the Gunn, and the younger keepers as well. But it probably doesn't help, and it probably is a bit of a disruptive element, because I'm sure David Wagner had no intentions to want to change his goalkeeper's coach at this stage of the pre-season cycle. But in terms of the overall impact or detrimental impact to Norwich, I don't really see it. I mean, I'll bowl that one back to you, Connor. Where do you sit on that, Ed Wootten moving on, and the impact?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree with your conclusions. Really, I think it's been what, 2015, 8 years, is it, the club? I mean that's pretty good going for any coaching job in football. To be honest, he clearly views this to be a fresh opportunity, possibly a better chance of getting out of the division, maybe, depending on who you ask. I'm sure maybe Daniel Farke feels that, but also the opportunity to work with people who he's worked with before, which we know in football is a major sway. Hence why Norwich are employing a lot of ex-Huddersfield people, because of who run their football club, right? So he won 2 titles with Daniel Farke, worked very closely with him. I think ingrained himself pretty tightly within his coaching sanctum, and maybe there are probably family reasons and personal reasons perhaps why he didn't elect to make the move to Russia or to Germany when he did, when Daniel Farke left the football club. But yeah, Paul Clements, by all account, is the man coming in, or set to come in. He will link up with Norwich in Germany, providing all the bits of paperwork and contracts are signed and various bits are done. He was at Huddersfield for a prolonged period of time as well, spanning Stuart Webber and David Wagner's time. Before that, spent periods within Middlesbrough and Wolves' academy. Again, very similar journey to Ed Wootten, really. Started as an academy keeper, working his way up to the first team. I've spoken to people who know him inside the game, basically, and describe him as a really good developer of young goalkeepers, which is a positive, given where Norwich City are with those. They've got a plethora, haven't they, of young goalkeepers now between the 18s and 21s level. We spoke about this on the way to Kings Lynn. Reyes, Rose, Barden, Archie Mayer, who's obviously sealed a loan out to Gateshead, Reyes, a few others, Jaden St Paul. So there are countless goalkeepers, some more that I've missed off that list off the top of my head, but he's got a big stable to work with, but also someone who knows Palash, as you said, knows Wagner, knows the way these characters operate, and will know how David Wagner wants to play, how involved he wants his goalkeepers to be. And actually that may be really positive as Norwich look to, I guess, implement what he wants to do pretty clearer. And I think what we're seeing, and what we have seen in the opening 2 pre-season friendlies, if anyone is kind of expecting a change in terms of that build-up structure that we've spoken about endlessly on this podcast, where Norwich drop a midfielder in, they create almost a back three, one midfielder comes deeper, and there's a lot of space in the centre of the pitch. If anyone is expecting that to change, on the evidence of the first 2 pre-season friendlies, it doesn't look like it's going to. I think what they maybe get better at is the problem solving with the wingers coming a little bit deeper and maybe filling those holes, or perhaps one of the strikers dropping in a bit more than was the case. So having a coaching network of people who support that and support how you're trying to play football, but also know how to prepare players for it, is absolutely crucial. And if this is somebody coming in who knows the way that David Wagner operates, works, and all of those things, that can only be a real positive. He's really highly rated by all accounts. So it's an interesting one to bring in. And obviously the second coaching change this summer, after, as you said, Paddy, Narkis Palash came in from Huddersfield as well. Both left the club after Neil Warnock's appointment on a more full-term basis. I think that's probably not a reflection on them, but obviously Neil Warnock's somebody who likes to bring around staff with him. I think Ian Bennett has subsequently been appointed at Huddersfield. So yeah, a really interesting one to monitor. Whether it will have any kind of tangible impact is going to be interesting to see. And I guess we'll probably only really get that when we speak to the goalkeepers involved. But yeah, that's an interesting one to keep an eye on in terms of their coaching stable. Let's speak a little bit about Kings Lynn then, Pad. It was a 6-1 victory. It was, I felt, certainly first half, a completely dominant display, probably better than what we saw at Barnet. But again, at Barnet they were under stress. It was a first pre-season friendly. There's a lot of elements as to why that game was like it was. Kings Lynn, probably a completely different set of circumstances. Is there anything in particular that stood out to you? Like I said, I don't think we need to do the full dissection as we normally would with a league game, but are there any strands that you've taken away from it? Ashley Barnes had a hat-trick, players impressing. Name me something that really caught your eye at the Walks on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, they were the obvious ones, weren't they? The Barnes, Sargent axis particularly, you could see that moving forward. I mean, Stacey, we touched on it before, he caught the eye again in terms of his offensive instincts as a fullback. But I think, and I put it to David, and funny enough, we're recording this Tuesday morning. And it's Monday, isn't it? Yeah, the weeks merge into one when it's pre-season. But on Monday morning, and we put the quotes up actually from David to the question about Nunes, and I thought it was very revealing what he said. Essentially, to paraphrase that, talking of Pelach, that the Spanish-speaking introduction of a coach there has really allowed maybe Nunes to understand completely what David Wagner is asking him to do, and if he can just work on it. And for me, it was his downfall last season. In those deeper line midfield areas, is almost not sensing the speed of the game in this country, and losing the ball, turnovers in dangerous areas, putting his team in trouble. Lack of a defensive awareness, really playing in a deeper lying role. David, unprompted, referenced those as almost red flags, and if he can cut those out or limit those in his game, there's so many other, and he went on to list them, elements of his midfield craft that you would think this guy in the Championship can be a standout player, certainly in a Norwich team, if he can just work on some of the deficiencies in his game that we all saw last season. And it's important that David flags that, because both at Lynn and Barnet, he has deployed him in almost in a sort of a sort of tandem six role, with a double pivot with a McLean, as it was at the weekend. But rather than get carried away with it, it was Kings Lynn, and Norwich had so much possession and territory in and around the opposition box, and there wasn't a huge amount of pressure on him or on the ball, that he was able to basically play as a six, but it was more in an 8 and a 10 area of the field. And you saw his quality. He was involved in, I think, the second goal off the top of my head, the third goal, the fourth goal. And that's what he can do. He can create chances. He can score goals, some wonderful goals. We all know that. But in terms of something that we, maybe has flown under the radar a little bit in these first two games, I think Nunes in the six role, or the six area of the pitch in the Championship, if he can deal with the more defensive elements of the game, because he will. Inevitably, Norwich will be under pressure. There'll be teams transitioning and countering on them. And if he can be better in those areas and not cough up the amount of turnovers he was tending to do, then I think we can, as David said, I think David's phrase was, will dramatically improve his game. And that's quite a bullish statement from a head coach, certainly one to go public with. I'm sure it's nothing he hasn't sat down through Pelach maybe and communicated that to Marcelino this summer, maybe even back end of last season. That, look, if I'm going to trust you in that position of the pitch, if you're going to be the player I think you can be in this league, you need to deal with those areas of what's required in that position of the pitch in a David Wagner Norwich City side. So, yeah, for me, that was, while we can go to the headline elements of the Lynn game or the Barnet game, I think where Nunes could be and where he could get to really intrigues me. And, it was good. It was really good and quite revealing, I thought, to hear David talk in those terms as well, because that was sort of my sense watching him last season, that, there's no doubt the talent's there. What a player he can be for Norwich on the ball, creatively. But if you're going to play him in a deeper line role, he also needs to add those more responsible elements to his game. And that might not come naturally to him. I think David alluded to that as well at Kings Lynn. But he clearly feels he can do that. He can add that to his game. And by doing that, I think you add another dimension to Marcelino Nunes in a Norwich shirt.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's a really interesting one, isn't he? It's great, I think, for him that they've brought in, obviously, a Spanish-speaking coach, Vicente Reyes as well. He's someone that's still not fully grasped English yet and been able to grapple with that in the same way that maybe Gabriel Sara has, and that will come, I'm sure. But I think we all maybe felt that if those elements could come together, and if Norwich were able to get something out of him, there was a possibility that he could become a really big player in his second season. And everything you said there, I mean, we kind of saw it initially when he came in and he had those really impressive performances, didn't he? There were a few early doors that really stood out. Wigan, Holloway, there were countless others. And just seemed to sort of fatigue towards the end of the campaign. So hopefully all of those elements will play. And it's going to be interesting to see if Norwich do actually go with him there. I mean, a few mentions from me. Jack Stacey, again, as I mentioned, certainly from an attacking perspective, I think we're seeing him as someone who will really cause problems in the Championship in terms of his underlapping, overlapping, crossing from all areas, really accurate, fierce, ranging deliveries. Really, there are a lot of low drives, but also quite whipped, pacey ones. And if you're Ashley Barnes, I'd imagine you're licking your lips at the prospect of him on the right hand side. Shane Duffy as well, I thought was pretty good and showed some good elements. Scored a hilarious own goal, which I think we both missed at the time because Norwich had literally just scored before that, but I've seen subsequently, and it's an excellently executed chip. Go on, Pad.
No, yeah. I mean, I was looking up, and at the moment, Tim Krul was backpedaling like Superman, trying to claw it out the goal. So having seen the highlights now, what I can't quite fathom with that is that Duffy actually takes a look to where Krul is when the ball's in the air, and I'm not quite sure why Krul has continued to advance because you can clearly see what Duffy has in his mind. But maybe he just thought he was going to cushion a header, and he's gone a bit heavier on the old bonts. And yeah, no, it was a bit of a comical interlude, but. That looked like the only way Kings Lynn were going to score, really, and it had no material impact. But yeah, I mean, David was having a chuckle about that after the game, wasn't he, when asked? But put that in isolation, and David said it. There was lots to like about his influence and impact potentially moving forward. Because of course, everything we're watching now, it's all well and good, but it's like, how will this map over to Hull City onwards, kind of thing, and. I still have a few concerns, in central defence more broadly with the personnel they've got available, but and whether that is probably another area. And of course, there's the Bama Daly factor in the background in terms of where his future lies. So I think they might have to go into the market again in that area. But if Duffy stays fit, I think he's definitely an upgrade on what they had there last season.
Yeah, agreed. And there was one moment in particular, Jordan Ponticelli got played in behind in the first half, and he did really well to kind of, it got away from him. He did really well to catch him up, but also brilliantly timed slide tackle to kind of scoop the ball away. And I think it went out for a corner, but that was a really positive sign. There was kind of glimpses of his aerial dominance as well. A couple of set pieces at the near post that he headed away, and I get the sense when he heads something away, it goes away. It's not one of those where it falls on the edge of the box; it goes to the halfway line. So we had a couple of those, and there was also an interesting routine in the first half where Norwich were attacking a corner, and they all bunched towards the back post, and it was designed to let Duffy kind of come away and attack the ball freely, and so it's going to be interesting to see if we see a bit more of that. So some positive signs on that front. Obviously, Ashley Barnes. Goals absolutely, and took them all really well, but there was some positive early signs I felt of a relationship between him and Josh Sargent. A couple of really nice moments of interplay on the edge of the box, and maybe an understanding of each other at various points, which we haven't always seen with Norwich City relationships. I guess my striking relationships, that is, and my fear, I guess, to link this maybe back to the wide debate, is if Norwich aren't able to get one in. Do we end up with a situation where we start seeing Josh Sargent on the right again until October? It's not real, or the left or whatever. It's not really a situation you want to see. It's interesting that he was wearing the number 9 and has been wearing the number 9 since he returned from pre-season as well. And I think that's as much a sign of intent than it is anything else. He wants to step into Temi Pukki's shoes, and he did get on the score sheet as well after, again, some good play from Poeta and Barnes. John Rowe as well, another one to mention. I spoke to him post game. It's the first time I've spoken to him since he broke through. Really upbeat chap, lots of energy. Again, scored Norwich's first goal of pre-season, but also has looked really energetic and really lively, and was almost foaming at the mouth talking about how hungry he is this season to take his opportunity and how much he's enjoying working under David Wagner. So that's an interesting one. For as much as we talk about the wide debate, if he can join the party, someone who wasn't available for large parts of last year, then maybe that would only force Norwich to dip their toe in the market once rather than twice. All of these elements are obviously worth thinking about in terms of that debate, as we discussed earlier. Paddy, we're off to Germany. It's going to be a really interesting trip, isn't it? 2 games. It starts with Darmstadt on Wednesday at their ground, Christoph Zimmermann reunion, and then Kaiserslautern, which is the one I'm looking forward to, mainly for the stadium. I think it's 49,000. That's going to be an incredible trip as well. But also, I mean, yeah, let's deal with the trip first. How much are you looking for? You've obviously done a fair few pre-season tours in your time. This is the first one that I've been able to get out to because of COVID and various different things.
Well, Conor, let me correct you there.
Scotland. That's true.
Now, to our Scottish listeners, I'm sure they wouldn't want to be referred to part of the same country, but there you go.
Well, it depends, doesn't it? I guess. But let's not get into that.
That's Conor's own view about the UK makeup.
But in terms of, like, over going over a sea and abroad and whatnot. how much are you looking forward to this one in particular? We've obviously got quite a busy, I think it's basically 3 countries in 3 weeks for us, isn't it, in the next few weeks?
It is indeed, yeah. No, that will be quite busy. All in association with Cavill Healthcare, our proud sponsors. So thanks for their support for the 3-legged European tour for the PinkUn, and more importantly for Norwich. But yeah, I mean, I kind of maybe preempted it at the start of the podcast. This feels to me now, you've got your 2 weeks of base fitness in. You've got some minutes into legs on pitches against non-league opposition, but a soon to be, or technically a Bundesliga club in Darmstadt and the Zimbo connection, and then obviously Kaiserslautern, big name. As you say, massive support. That they will be considerably stiffer tests, and we'll learn more as a result. And then moving on, of course, if you want to broaden it out, Alkmaar got to the semi-finals in Europe last season, knocked out by West Ham, and even Toulouse, a very good Ligue 1 side from France, so in Austria. So, yeah, I think it feels like it starts from here now, really, in terms of the footballing side, that what we want to see emerge with, of course, now, unfortunately, brought home to us by the Sainz injury, no more disruptions in terms of potential key players who pick up injuries on this European swing as it is, before they get back to Carrow Road for Olympiacos, isn't it? Yeah, for that game. So, I think, as I said, if we sit down, as we will do post-German tour, I think we'll have a far better idea of who's really putting their hands up now, who can really be an impactful element on this Norwich City Championship season, and where maybe conversely it underlines, no, they probably need to do a little bit more business, maybe. And who knows, within a week, maybe things will start to move in terms of those potential outs that we expect to develop, which has then obviously knock-on effects for what Norwich may need to do inward-wise. But I guess with tours generally, with obviously COVID and the pandemic, and we didn't get out to the games. I think when they played in Marseille, I think they played in Germany. I think in Dean Smith last summer. So yeah, it feels like for me personally, it's been quite a while. Because of events that we've all had to live through. So it is good. I think David himself said this is very much this week coming now. It's something that he's pushed for. He it felt like has put these games together. He was a Darmstadt player. He said that the sporting director at Kaiserslautern is his best mate or one of his best mates. So and he said the reason they're going out for it is actually the quality of opposition, that it's very hard to replicate that in England at this stage of pre-season. So this week in Germany feels very much David Wagner led. And he will certainly want to return back to England in a week or so's time, with a sense that, things are now really starting to move, and there's a momentum building to what it's all about, of course, which is Hull City and the Championship kickoff. But you and Mr. Harvey will be joining my good self, and don't worry, I'll look after you, Connor. Your first time on a plane.
Yeah. It's going to be good, isn't it?
Do you feel you're going to be a nervous flyer then? I hope not, because if so, we're in for trouble, as you're sat next to me, I think.
No, I think I'll be okay. I think I'll be okay. I mean, the thing is, and I've said
you were okay. You were okay until I started talking about nervous flying, and now I've planted the seed. So I apologize.
Well,
for that.
do you know, I've said to a few of my family have asked me that question, and it's a bit like, well, when you're up there, I mean, you're going to come down, aren't you? So it's just kind of, it's out of your control. So there's not much I can do really. But yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be good. I'm looking forward. I mean, German football is, I think for anyone who likes football, isn't it, seen as culturally a really interesting place to go and watch. I know they're going to be pre-season friendly, so maybe the atmospheres will be a bit different, but just to experience different stadiums and a different culture and a different footballing world is going to be fascinating. Also to see how Norwich City get on, and like you say, two really good tests. Darmstadt, who have just been promoted back to the Bundesliga, and Kaiserslautern, who are a Bundesliga 2 side, but as we've discussed already, really big fan base, really big expectations, and going to be 2 firm tests. We'll see the home kit this week as well. There'll be lots whilst we're out there to get our teeth into, and Paddy, I guess we should reinforce that point. We are going to be there, and there's going to be all of the usual coverage with bells on, right, from Germany. Just talk to us a little bit. I'm basically asking you to it's one of those like in the what's the film? Is it Wolf of Wall Street where he says, "Sell me the pen"? I'm basically asking you to do that. Sell our listeners what exactly we're going to be providing them whilst we're out there.
Well, Connor, yeah, it comes naturally to me being a salesperson. But essentially, if you've not already subscribed to the PinkUn digitally, be it through the brand websites, in layman's terms, or obviously the PinkUn Plus app, which I'm sure is not a surprise to you now. We've been banging on about it for about 16, 17 months now. But now's really is the opportunity to maybe go and get a subscription. Go to the App Store, go to wherever you download your apps on your chosen mobile platform, download it, free trial, and just try it out, no obligation. And because I think I'm right in saying we're probably the only media, from what we're led to believe, who are going to be out there covering all three legs of this European tour. So our usual game cycle coverage, albeit slightly less resource in terms of headcount at games, but all the key elements will be covered. We'll try and bring a bit of the flavour of the tour away from the games as well, but both in Germany and Holland and Austria, less so. But yeah, really, this now is the chance, or really the time, I feel, to go and download it if you haven't already done, and for a trial period, just sample what we've got to offer, and if you like it, maybe you'll stay with us on the journey, because obviously, when the real business kicks in, we'll be there as always. Every game, every press conference, home, away, doesn't matter. PinkUn will get you as close as we can to the action. So this is where it starts now. So come and join us on the journey.
Good work. We'll let people listening and watching assess your salesman skills and whether you've been very successful. But I think, to be fair, if you take out a free trial now, that would cover you it would cover you till the 10th of August as we record today. So that would get you through all of pre-season and the first opening weeks of the season. So it would give you a real flavour of what we do over there. And I think if you did that, I think we're pretty confident that you'll love it, as we do, and a better user experience as well if you do decide to go onto the app. What sort of, we always talk about food on the pod, so it'd be remiss of us not to end on food. What are you going to expose me to? Because it was tapas in Scotland, wasn't it? Which I'm a tapas convert now. I'm not very culturally enriched when it comes to food. What are you going to expose me to in Germany, Pad?
Well, people are probably thinking, what's he going on about? Went to Scotland and had Spanish cuisine, but it was more kind of, so you could sort of tick off two boxes: A, going to Scotland on tour, and B, experiences. Well, as you keep telling me, Connor, you're a big fan of sort of Indian cuisine and curries and that. So we might have to trick it up with obviously German cuisine. I think is well known that sausages are a pretty a staple part of the German cuisine, and so maybe something curry related around sausages might be the way to go. Why are you shaking your head for anybody watching? You've got to embrace it. You've got to embrace. You're talking about embracing football cultures. You should really extend that to your cuisine.
No, as you know, I don't do curry. So maybe I'll try a regular. You can get like a bratwurst, haven't you? There's a curry verse and a bratwurst. If I understand these things right.
That's basically a hot dog, though, Connor. That's the hot dog by a different name.
Well,
so
you've just offended however many millions of Germans and attacked their culture. Well, calling a bratwurst a hot dog, I don't know what the differences are. Well, I don't know, but I think
to be fair,
a hot dog.
Yeah, anybody who's tuning in for food-related content from me and you is going to be offended, because we're definitely not Michelin-starred purveyors of food. So probably best to wrap this element up. Well, we'll update for anybody who's remotely interested on what you ate in Germany for the post-German pod.
Yeah, and of course, if you've got any suggestions of any German cuisine, if you're the German Canaries, I know they exist, don't they? If you're listening to this, then do let us know. I think we're going to be based in and around Frankfurt, so I think that's a broad enough region for people not to come and hunt us down. But so we're going to be based in and around that region. So let us know if there's any particularly good places that we should be checking out there as a final plug.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah.
And
any recommendations? For food?
Yeah,
that would be good.
and we'll try them out. Just finally then, Pad, I mean, probably moved into any other business territory, but because I know we get asked these questions frequently on Q&As about kits and shares as well, we'll cover those off. So home kit, as I said earlier, I'd expect that to come in the next week. I'd be shocked if it wasn't in place for the Kaiserslautern game. Less so Darmstadt. I think that will likely have another outing of the away kit for that. So I'll push the one on shares for you, because I think a lot of people will have heard Zoe Webber's comments, obviously at the fans forum, which we discussed last week, and where Norwich City are exactly in that. How close do you feel we are now to getting some white smoke, I suppose, on these shares, which were allotted back in February?
Yeah, well, off the back of what Zoe did talk about at was it a couple of Mondays previous, wasn't it? So, a fortnight or so ago, about the share process. And as you say, Connor, that feels like it's gone into a bit of a holding pattern, certainly publicly from February. I think that general meeting which was essentially a vehicle to create 194,000 off the top of my head shares. I think we'll hear something fairly imminently on that, certainly in the next few weeks. I think I'm not going to lock anybody in, but it's been communicated to me that, they're kind of obviously beholden a little bit, and it'll all be explained in due course to other bodies in terms of the legal sort of frameworks within which they're operating as a PLC, which Zoe mapped out. It's almost, they are a PLC, but for the purposes of what they're trying to do here in terms of move shares and change maybe the shareholding mix, they're treated no differently to a FTSE 100 company, is how it's been explained to me. So as a result, there's a lot of regulatory process and external elements that they have to sort of touch base with before they were in a position to communicate anything to their shareholders primarily, and then obviously the fan base more generally. I think they feel they might be in position to do that in the next few weeks. And then it'll become very clear. The path to what they're trying to do will be very clear. And at that point, we'll probably be able to talk in a little bit more detail about what it looks like and what it actually means, and maybe try and, because I think there'll be a lot of legal jargon around what the next step is and whether shareholders fall into that process. And hopefully we'll be able to deconstruct a little bit of that. But obviously at the minute, I think the club are simply waiting for the green light from these regulatory bodies, and then they will move to push this process on. And as we've all spoken about since sort of the first announcement about February's allotment shares meeting and the potential destination of those shares, that'll all play out, hopefully, as the club would like it to, and as maybe a lot of fans would like to, in terms of where those shares will end up being allotted and what that will mean then moving forward in terms of the ownership of the football club. So, I think we're getting to that period, but until they get the green light, then we'll continue to wait. But I think it will become clear in very short order, and then we'll do our best to try and interpret what that means, and then we'll see what happens in the next stage of the process. But just essentially, everything we're being told internally sort of chimes with what Zoe said to those fans, and shareholders, no doubt, who were gathered at the forum a couple of Mondays ago, that it isn't directly in their gift to move this along at the pace they'd like to. They're having to obviously move in lockstep with the legal bodies who are driving this process as a PLC, which is what they are. And I think we're probably reaching the point where that will then move on to the next phase. And and then shareholders, fans more generally will start to get some answers.
Lovely stuff. Watch this space on that, and of course, watch this space across the PinkUn channels as we jet out to Germany on Tuesday morning, and we'll be in our German base by certainly Tuesday evening. So we'll be all there and ready in place for the Darmstadt game on Wednesday. Paddy, thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very much for listening as well. Thank you to our sponsors, Cavell Healthcare, who are coming with us on tour this summer. It's brilliant to have what is a brilliant local care organisation on board, and as you can see, it's been, if you're watching the pod on YouTube, you've been able to see all the details of their various social medias, but I'll read it out at Cavell Health CA1 on Twitter, or www.cavellhealthcare.co.uk for details on them. Whether you're looking for a job in care or you're looking for the care of a loved one, they're the place to go. Thank you very much, and we will see you very, very soon, likely from our German base. Keep it locked. We'll see you soon.